I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about approaches to dealing with anger. Every one of us has to deal with anger at one time or another within ourselves, or we see the influences and the outgrowth of anger in the world. In today's environment, we see so many demonstrations of the negative power and influence of anger. And so this is a very important emotion and an important dynamic for us to look at and understand. There are all kinds of anger, but unless we're able to control and direct our anger, it can so often become a destructive influence in our lives. In New Thought, we believe firmly that we live in our minds and not in the world. And so the world that we live in and that we have our movement in is a reality, but only a reality to the extent that it is experiences through which all of us move. But the real life, the real world is within us. It's within our minds, in your mind and in my mind. And as we see the influences of mind, we create the world in which we live. One of the things that we say is that mind is the single most powerful creative force in the universe. And it is even mind, or thought, if you will, the dynamic of mind, that brought this universe into existence. If we look at the Bible in the book of Genesis and the creation story, we can see that God thought and called into reality this life. And in all of our life experiences, it is thought that creates. Everything that is, everything that we experience, everything that we see and use and touch and feel and see in life comes from mind. Everything was in mind before it is created and comes forth in matter. An example is the television that you watch. The television that you watch, the camera into which I am speaking, were thought of before they were created. Someone had a vision, had a thought of what that television could be or would be, what this camera could be or would be. That person shared their vision and their idea of mind, what they saw in their mind, with someone else, created the directions and the plans to put the piece of equipment together, and then others saw the plans and in their minds saw these instruments and these pieces of equipment being put together. Everything that you have in life and that I have in life were created in mind. The room that you sit in, the chair that you're sitting on, the building in which you live, the cars, all of the things that we have in life are created by mind. And so with this reality and truth, we know that mind is such a powerful dynamic and that mind creates so much. It creates everything that is. In New Thought, we believe that our mind is connected with divine mind. And when our human mind is connected with the divine mind of God, then we have a connectiveness that creates a creative force that is able to make anything. And what is really created and made is the things and thoughts that go on in our mind. So anger as an emotion and anger as a thought create for us an environment in which we live and move and have our being, if you will. When we combine anger with other negative emotions like fear or jealousy or isolation, the combination of these negative influences and emotions coupled with anger creates a very, very dangerous circumstance and situation. What we would say also is it creates a vibration. It sets in motion a unseen power that moves and creates in and of itself. We all know what comes of anger. From anger that is combined with other dangerous and negative influences and emotions, we end up with violence, we end up with devastating things that take place in the world. But all of this comes from the power of mind. All of it comes from what is within us. And everything that happens in us before it happens in the outer world. In the neighborhood in which you live, in the community in which you have your residence, the nation where you live, and the part of the world in which you reside. All of those areas are touched by anger and violence that comes about through the processes of people's minds. And as people of like mind get together, and more angry people gather together, combining these negative emotions with their anger, then the creative force brings about something that can be very devastating. We think it's important that we remember that we live in our minds, and therefore dealing with negative influences and processes is very important for you and for me as responsible people, as people who want to live the life that they are called to live, guided and directed by an infinite intelligence and a loving God. It is God's desire and will for us that we should always live in an environment that is positive and supportive and nurturing. And so anytime our world moves into another realm, we move away from the divine and we move away from the positive into the negative influences of life. And our challenge always is to keep our thoughts focused in the positive aspects of life. But all of us are faced with some negativity in our lives, and the emotion of anger is a response that comes from within all of us. And so anger is something that we need to be very mindful of and that we need to understand. It is also a dynamic and an emotion that we need to learn to recognize within ourselves, and we need to recognize it in others. And in that way, this aspect of our personality and our dynamic can be dealt with and counteracted in an appropriate and reasonable way. So many times in our lives we have residual anger, and residual anger is that kind of piling on and piling on of anger that builds and builds and comes to a point of explosion or comes to a point of consuming our entire being. Some people in relationships have residual anger. They have anger because in the midst of their relationship, hurts and words and deeds begin to build and build, and there's never a dealing with those angers. There's never a dealing with what's happening inside, and then something happens and we end up with the combination of residual anger that comes forth in someone's life, and it can destroy relationships, it can destroy jobs, it can destroy communities, it can destroy entire nations. We believe that there's an important distinction when we look at the dynamic of mind. We have our conscious mind, which is that which we're aware of every day and as we go about our daily life. And then we have subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind continues to absorb the experiences that we have in life. It absorbs the things that we read and the things that we see and the words that are spoken. And as our subconscious mind simply absorbs the experiences of conscious life, of our conscious mind, the subconscious builds up a concept, an idea, a thought form that comes out and presents itself in our conscious mind from time to time when there's a triggering experience. An example of this would be simply to talk about the dentist. All of us have feelings about dentists. Some of us like our dentist, some of us don't like our dentist, but typically when we think of a dentist, we begin the process of mind thinking about, in some cases, that we've been hurt, that it's not a pleasant experience, that it's not something that we want to do, go to the dentist. The conditioning of our subconscious mind is the collection of the things that we've thought and the experiences that we've had deposited in the subconscious, and then those come forth into our conscious mind at different points in time. Anger is a part of this dynamic that we experience in our lives. We become angry for a myriad of reasons. We become angry beginning as little children and through the experiences of our life. It may be something that was said, something that was taught, something that others shared with us, but we create within us this issue of anger, and it is deeply seated in our conscious and subconscious mind. So the origins of anger, the origins of all of our emotions, both positive and negative, that we have in this life experience are deeply seated in our mind. They're deeply seated in the subconscious and in the conscious mind. And so what we need to do is to be aware of the reality that anger is real, that it exists in everyone's life, that it exists in everyone's mind. And what we need to do is look at anger on a personal level and begin a process of examination of conscience, if you will, examination of our own inner being, examination of the way in which our own mind operates. And if we find that anger is a major part of our life, if anger is a major part of the process of our thinking, then we need to alert ourselves to the reality that this is an aspect of our mental life and of our physical life and of our spiritual life that needs to be addressed. And anger needs to be addressed on a physical level, a mental level, and on a spiritual level. And as we approach the reality of anger in these ways, in these three separate areas, we begin to be aware of where anger is present in your life and in my life, and we can begin the process of dealing with it in a positive and constructive way. Our goal is not to eliminate anger, but our goal is to control and condition our way of thinking about those things that make us angry. And as we're angry, we need to be able to channel that anger and direct that anger so that it can be disseminated and diffused in our lives so that we don't have dangerous aspects of life like violence and confrontation, either in our minds, in our family, or in our larger circle of life. To begin this process, those things that make us angry are things that have either been done to us, things that have been said to us, or things that we have observed. And if we understand that, we can begin the process of eliminating the blame, beginning the process of forgiveness, and releasing the hurts of the past. And if we're able to do these things, if we're able to give up blaming people, circumstances, or situations in our life, if we're able to forgive people, circumstances, and situations, and if we're able to relieve and release the hurts that have come into our life by people, circumstances, and situations, we begin the process of controlling and channeling the anger that we have in life. Every one of us know when it is that we become angry. And in this process, we are invited to identify the signs of anger within ourselves, both internal and external. And I'd invite you to examine your life, to look at your life and determine what it is that creates the anger in your being, in your consciousness, and in your thoughts, and in your thinking. Find the trigger points in your life. Find and consciously be aware of the things that make you angry. When you find these trigger points, these things that have made you angry, you can begin a process of looking within yourself and asking what it is that has caused you to feel this way. Is it something that was said? Is it something that was done? Is it something that you have witnessed? And begin the single, simple little process of identifying the trigger points of anger in your life and finding ways to deal with those circumstances and situations so that you can control and participate in the way that your mind acts and reacts to the circumstances and situations in life. Anger can be dealt with in a myriad of ways, but it has to be dealt with. If it is in you, it has to come out. And so often in our lives, we say that there are people who are good in life and there are people who are bad. There are people who are positive and there are people who are negative. There are people who are peaceful and there are people who are turbulent. There are people who are violent and there are people who are tranquil. And in truth, we always have a choice, and the choice is always ours to decide how it is we react and respond to the circumstances and situations in life. And so in order to let these feelings be dealt with, there are a number of things that we can do. If we are people who get angry easily, there is a way to deal with it on a physical level, and that is to allow the physical aspect of our anger to be dissipated and dispersed in a positive and supportive way. Just like stress and other negative aspects, the physical reality of these experiences can be released when we build upon a way of physically letting these negative stresses and emotions out. Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to go for a run. Maybe you need to do something with your hands. Maybe you need to create within yourself a physical activity. And be sure that the physical activity is something that's truly physical. So often we think that turning on the television is a physical activity or taking a drink is a physical activity. The physical activity I'm talking about is an actual physical dynamic that causes your body to do something in a constructive and positive way. So maybe it's simply taking a walk or doing some exercise. The next aspect that we can use to actively deal with anger in our lives is to deal with it at an emotional level. And that is that we need to counter the anger that we have with positive and supportive emotions. Do we talk? Do we laugh? Do we express ourselves in positive and uplifting ways? If your emotions are spent most of the time in an angry state and an angry consciousness, look at your life and see if there isn't a need for a different emotional outlet, if there isn't a need to talk with someone, to talk about the circumstances and situations that upset you, perhaps even to talk to the people that have caused you the hurt or the anger in the first place. Laughing is a wonderful technique and an opportunity to overcome the difficulties of anger that face us all. And it may sound kind of crazy to laugh in the midst of an angry time, but maybe what you need to do then is turn the television on and watch something that's funny, read a funny book, create some humor in your life to counter the anger that you have. And from a mental and spiritual standpoint, our response to anger should be to reflect deeply. That is, to look deeply within ourselves and to open ourselves to the divine reality and the truth and love of God. And when we do that, we can flood ourselves at the time of our angry flaring and feeling with the reality that something is happening within us and that we want and we claim the presence and the power of God, of the universe, to bring us to a peaceful and different state of life. We can deal with anger on a mental level, on a physical level, on an emotional level, and on a spiritual level. And we need to deal with anger in all of these realms of our lives in order to take this very negative aspect of life and to make it a positive influence that can change our way of thinking and our way of life. We live in our minds and not in the world. If you believe the world is an angry, violent place, then begin the process of changing your way of thinking about the world and about the world in which you live. Embrace the concepts that will allow you to deal with anger in a positive way, to let that negative emotion out of your being so that it doesn't control you, so that it doesn't move you to very painful and destructive areas, and so that it doesn't influence others around you. So it's a normal process to feel angry. Every one of us deals with anger, but we have the opportunity within ourselves to deal with anger in a positive way, and we have a spiritual undergirding and a spiritual presence that allows us to reflect upon this anger and to be guided and directed in a new and different way of thinking. We'd like to pause at this point of the program and invite you to join with us in a prayer, a moment of reflection, and we believe that prayer is a centering force, and we'd invite you to join with us now. Eternal and loving God, we gather our hearts and minds together in the reality that anger is an emotion that presents itself often in our hearts and minds and in the hearts and minds of others. And so we encircle and enfold this negative emotion in your divine presence, and we reflect upon the fact that the peaceful, harmonizing presence of God can dissipate and relieve the anger and violence in our lives, in our hearts, in our minds, and in our world. We know these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
Those were wonderful points you gave on conquering anger and avoiding anger. Mm-hmm. And you obviously have given a lot of thought to that, and I know that in your counseling work you see a lot of angry people. It's usually anger-based problems that cause people to need to seek counseling.
Mm-hmm. And the anger that we see as counselors, and we see in the church, and we see in the world, is so often externalized. And so often when people are angry, the tendency is to focus on whatever it is that's causing, that they believe to be causing the anger, when in reality we know that the anger is coming from within.
That's a key word, that they believe to be, because very often when people are most angry, they're transferring from one person to another or one situation to another. And the thing they think is making them angry is not really what's really making them angry. It's something within themselves, as you just said. And anger is created, I think, more by frustration, don't you?
I think so.
And the feeling of helplessness. And when we have the mob riots and the rioting and the mob going amok, it's because they are so angry already, and they use that one focal point as a focus on which to base their anger.
And then when we see these things happening, when we see the riots or we see the wars or we see the outpicturing of anger, which we see every night on the television and the news, then we begin to identify with it. And then that creative connectiveness of consciousness that we talk so much about comes into play, and then we all become angry.
Yeah, that's the mob rule, the mob mentality. And so we just have to stay serene within our own right. And as you were speaking, I was trying to think of the people I know who don't seem ever to be angry. And those people are always the most serene ones we know. It's the ones who don't let little surface things bother them, and they don't project onto others anything that's not really already there. Mm-hmm. And so they're the ones we can look to and learn from, and it's the people who are not judgmental and who don't, who are serene and happy all the time in their own right.
Mhm. And I think as people allow others to influence them, they are not able, they don't have enough inner strength. They have enough inner strength, but they don't draw upon their own inner strength, and they respond to what people say or do.
Yes, and they're easily swayed, in other words. So they're swayed into thinking things that they wouldn't normally think if they would just keep centered. And just taking 3 deep breaths and being centered in God's light is the key and the secret, because then we are serene and we don't let the surface things get to us. And if we could always just remember the deep breathing, I think a lot of problems would be avoided in the world, and a lot of anguish would be avoided.
And the deep breathing, of course, is a wonderful combination of both the physical aspect and the spiritual aspect
Right.
and the emotional aspect. And it's a little bit like the old adage or recommendation that have all been given when we're angry: count to 10.
Yes.
Probably the best, probably one of the best advices, because it takes our mind off of the circumstance and situation. It causes us to do something with our minds and with ourselves that directs us away from the anger, and we begin to see more clearly.
Yes, well, the anger, too, makes the vascular system constrict, and then it doesn't let blood get to our brain, and we don't really think clearly.
We don't. And the other aspect, which is very much along those same lines, is the devastating impact that stress and anger have on our physical bodies.
Yes.
And medical science, of course, today is making great strides in understanding the mind-body connection. And certainly as we move into the new age that we're moving into, out of the Piscean age and into the Aquarian age, we're going to begin to see medicine and spirituality and psychology and all of these sciences, social sciences and spiritual sciences, blending to understand and grasp this reality that the mind and body are connected. And so when we have anger and when we allow it to rule our being, it raises our blood pressure,
Yes.
it creates ulcers, it creates maybe cancer, it creates all kinds of diseases and wreaks havoc in our physical bodies. And certainly anger is one of the most destructive aspects of both our mind and our body and in the world.
Yes, and again, the vascular system is so constricted, and that would cause the heart problems. And then the doctors, psychologists say that it's repressed anger that causes cancer, almost without exception. And as I've talked with various people with cancer, as I've done counseling work, I found that they acknowledge that yes, they did repress their anger, and they realize, and when they realize then the problem and release it, it's very often a wonderful healing time for them.
And that's an important aspect that we didn't talk about in the talk, and we need to in the discussion, is that we're not talking about not having anger.
Yes.
And we're talking about controlling and conditioning our response to anger.
Yes.
And allowing it to vent in positive and supportive ways. All of us are going to get angry from time to time, and repressing that anger creates even more problems for us.
That's right, just repressing it. It's not in not feeling anger, it's in using the anger in a constructive way, using that energy, because we need the energy that the emotions give us to project us into new and different work and new and different ways.
And sometimes indignant anger expresses to others our feeling.
Yes.
And does some very positive things.
Yes.
So there are some positive ways, but I think the importance is that we not stay in the angry state and that we not allow it to be coupled with negative emotions to be destructive.
Yes, but being judgmental is one of the main reasons that we get angry, because we're judgmental. We're projecting onto other people what we think they might have thought, and very often they're not even thinking what we think they might, or the person who's angry is thinking, because it's just something coming from inside the person who's angry. It's not from what that other the person did that they were projecting their anger to.
And then our personal response to them creates another non-reality.
Yes.
So.
But we have, again, faith is the key. If we have faith that we can rise above anything, then, and there are reasons for everything, and to be non-judgmental and to just not be frustrated, to find out why we're feeling frustrated, if that's what we're feeling. And again, I think everyone who's angry is feeling very great frustration and helplessness, and to see what's causing that, and then what can we do about it. And if we think of those things rationally, then we don't become angry. And I know for myself, as I've become older, I've I don't know when I ever exhibit anger because nothing ever happens in my life to make me, I don't have reason to be angry.
Mhm.
But I was thinking back on when I was raising my children. Well, I was angry a lot of times. And when I had a husband in my life, I was angry a lot of times. And now my life is more smooth. And that's one bonus of living to be into old age. We can grow and progress spiritually because we don't have the we are able to just be more serene and more calm.
And as we grow older, we learn the principles, and the dynamic of our mind is more in tune with the spiritual reality and
Yes,
truth. If you had your children today, you would
yes,
be different with them, and you would respond differently to them. On the other
mm,
side, unfortunately, there are many people as they grow older who become more angry.
yes.
And so the opposite is true. And I think we need to be very cautious about our way of dealing with the situations of life.
That's true. My little great grandchildren spent 2 nights with me recently, or spent two grandchildren spent one night with me, and they were so wonderful the whole time they were there, and I didn't have to scold them one time. And I was thinking about that later, that the reason I didn't have to scold them is because I never got upset at anything they did. I stayed very calm all the time, so they stayed calm. And there was the key to my own children's misbehaving is because I was so uptight.
It
But
was the
but
way.
that's life.
That's life, and that's the way in which you dealt with
Yes.
people. And Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas and approaches in dealing with anger. We hope that you found these principles interesting, and we look forward to seeing you next time.